Hi everyone, good morning and welcome back to this class of American Church History, and this is week number 2. We'll continue our discussion about this America. The part 1 is America and then church and history. We are on the process of discussing the America. So we have discussed how we define America, and America, geographic America, and people. Then Federation of States, and then we discussed Americanism. What is Americanism? And why is it important? Because it has to do with Christianity. American culture is the same. It's very closely related to the understanding of America, the church. Church has influenced the culture. Majority of American culture has to do with Christian heritage. Then we talked about global America and the freedom of religion. That's where we stopped last week. So again, we know there political freedom and religious freedom, and then some other freedom like a financial freedom. And still, many of the countries on earth would not permit the freedom of worship or religion, or even the political freedom. And unless you have experienced the full freedom, you would not know if you are limited of your freedom. See, we have about almost 100,000 North Korean refugees that came into South Korea. And they have imagined and dreamed of freedom, but until you experience that freedom in coming into South Korea and live there, you do not know the extent of that freedom. Same thing happens with you. As you come to America from South Korea. I came to, America in my late 30s, early 30s. And then, even at that time, the freedom that I experienced in America would be even wider than the freedom I have experienced in Korea. So there is that difference. And it is quite an important thing to have the freedom to worship and to believe whatever you choose to believe. And that's very foundation of Americanism or American church. And then American evangelicals. These American evangelicals basically, as I define it, there's some different definitions, but for me, evangelicals are Christian Protestant believers who believes the Bible is the only and the sole authority over your faith and your life. And the Bible is fully inspired by the Holy Spirit, thus have the full authority as a scripture to dominate your faith and life. So that's basically what the evangelicals are. And these American evangelicals are still the majority of American Protestants. Not only they are born again believers, but the view, how they view the Bible as the scripture and authority, that defines the core elements of evangelicals. So Bible believing Christians, and then not only Bible believing, all the Christians are Bible believing, but you have you believe that Bible is 100% correct and without a fault. So that's the main thing that defines evangelicals. And this is still the majority of American Christians. And not only these evangelicals are the majority of American Christians, they are the major force still creating and running the America. I cannot say they will continue to be in the future, but it is true that the evangelicals losing their ground. As America becomes more secularized every day, I always say every day, not every year, but every day. And it's going fast, really fast. So we know that evangelicals are going to become minority soon. But yet, and the evangelicals still have voice, and then some of the leading force in America. And let's just jump to the next. The church and churches. How are you going to understand and define church? Because we are dealing with American church history. So this is church part. So chapter 2. If you have attended last lecture about early church history, we have covered this, but I'm doing this for some of the new students. When I do the lecture, I have to assume that every students are new to this class. I think that's fair to everyone. So I am going to repeat. Even if you have already been to last class for spring, still consider this to be the review, because we don't remember everything, right? The word church, it appears in the New Testament, the second part of the Bible. That the second part of the Bible is written in Greek, the ancient Greek, in the language of Greece. Now is Greece. And then the Greek, at the time of Jesus, when the Hellenic, Greek-Roman culture is dominant culture. It was it's like today's America. English is the global language. Same thing with the Greek. in the Hellenic world, Greece and the major part of Roman Empire, they used the Greek to if you are educated, if you're learned, you are able to write and read and speak Greek, just like today English. So that's why the New Testament is written in Greek. And in that Greek text, New Testament, the church is ecclesia. It means called out of. So it's an assembly or group of people who are called out. The original, the background of the word is in the Roman culture, in Greco-Roman culture. There is a city, yard, or the court in the middle of the city. And when they have an important issue to discuss, whether it's a political, social issues, they summon means call out the resident people to gather in that court, the central court, to have that, free, democratic discussion. So ecclesia is a product of democracy, the Greco-Roman democracy, and that image, that idea, is employed or borrowed from the Greek language and used to represent the gathering of Christians, the imaginary entity of church. So ecclesia becomes the name to call the church, the gathering of believers who are called out of the world. So actually, so we are the people who are called out of world, or called out of eternal death. So that's what the church means. So if you're a believer, you need to know that the church is not a building. It's not an institution. The church is the spiritual entity. It's invisible and yet visible. See, invisible yet visible. Me and you, some believers, we are Christians. So it is visible as a person and people and individuals. But the actual the church does not include this body that I'm borrowing while I'm on earth. It's our spirit and soul that is going to be lifted. And we are going to have a new body. So this old body is going to be gone. So in a spiritual sense, the body that I am using is not going to be part of the church. So that's how the church is perceived, understood in Christian faith. And then we say the 교회. I don't know how you pronounce it in Chinese, but as we read the Chinese character in Korea, we say 교회. That's it means gathered to be taught, or teaching gathering, or gathering around the teaching or the idea or belief. So that's what it means. In English we say church, but the church in English is originally it means a house. So in English version of 교회, the church is more like a building, a gathering place. And then when we say in a church in Christian religion or Christianity, it has actually three different connotation. The church, the first one, is a universal church, invisible. Catholic Church, we know as the Vatican Church. That's not what I'm referring to. This church, the Catholic Church, is invisible, spiritual, whole church. See, from the very first Christian, the first Christian is Jesus Christ himself, to the last one, whoever that's going to be, we do not know. But this entire, every believer in old and new, today and even to tomorrow, that includes. And it includes European, American, Korean, Chinese, and the African. It includes every race and every place, from the beginning to the end of the earth and the end of the history. So that's the whole universal church. So this Catholic, another word in English translation would be universal church or eternal church, or spiritual church. That's all the same thing. It's invisible, everything, everyone included, who are the true believers. Then we have a church there with a capital C. A church is the church at the given time and given place. That's a Catholic universal church that is within the time and the space, just true believers. Okay, let's say Chinese church, 2021. Today is June 29th. Okay, when we say that, June 29th, 2021, Chinese church, all the Chinese, ethnic Chinese believers, whether they are in America, whether they're in China, whether they're in Europe somewhere, all the Chinese, so-called Chinese, ethnic and national identity, they are going to be the Chinese church, a church. And then the church with the small c, that's a local church. Church with a small c. See, in that church, as an institution. Institutional church or local church. And this kind of church as an organization, as denomination, and this kind of church, you have church members, but not all the church members are true believers. See, that's a very tricky part. You can register as a church member. You can even be baptized. And you can be even become an elder or deacon or even pastors. You know that some of the pastors are not a true Christian. It's very ironic, but it is true. There are those pastors who does not really truly believe. They think they believe, but their faith as a pastor is not based on the Bible, or rather on something else. And when that happens, if you're not a born again Christian, we don't consider. Us evangelical believers, we do not consider them as true believers. So in a church, these institutions, there are those who just are not true Christian. We call nominal Christians. They have name Christians, but in truth, they are not a believer. So the church, local church, includes those who are nominal Christians. They say they are Christians, but they are not true Christians. See, this for some of you may be a very difficult concept to understand, but us who are in church, who are already believers, we need to make that distinction, clear distinction, because a true Christian and nominal Christian are two different things. And it is many times these nominal Christians who cause the issues and problems. I'm not saying that the so-called true Christians, born-again Christians are perfect. They still cause problems and issues as well. But, as I experienced, those who really cause some issues and problems are not not true Christians, but they are more those nominal Christians. Now, to understand the church, as we are going to continue to refer to church. We need to understand what the church is, especially those who are not Christians but still coming to listen to the lecture, this so-called Christian subjects. We need to understand and at least be able to distinguish the true nature of the church. First, church is not an institution or an organization. The church through church, with a big C, capital C, is a living organism. It's a living thing. It's a people. It's a person. It's godly person, godly people who gather. Born again Christian. That doesn't mean that you are perfect. sinful, still sinful, has that nature, still have that physical nature, desire to, not desire, but that tendency to sin, because we are still embodied with this earthly body. But still, the gathering of these people is not an organization, not an institution, should not be institutionalized. It's an organism, it's a living thing. Then the church is social organization and structure. The church that we are talking about is this: the local church and churches, which is a visible presentation of the church, or a church with a capital C. There is that tension. But we cannot avoid to have institutionalized or organized church, because we are human beings living within the time and space, which needs certain institution, certain organization, certain order. Because of that need, we need to have this organizational church. Then church, when we talk about church, it has software and hardware. Usually the hardware is of the building, the equipment, the rooms, and then you have the musical instruments, and the lighting, and then power system, PA system, and all these things are considered hardware. And the software is where you are discipling, you're teaching, you're educating, then you have the idea, the belief, the faith, the doctrine, theology. These are the softwares. And hardware and software, we do need hardware because we are within the time and space. The reality that we live in, it does require hardwares. So it is essential to have both hardware and software in the so-called earthly church. So for us, there are two different modes of earthly church. Earthly church, a true church, earthly church that is institutionalized. And both, whether it says the spiritual, unseen, invisible, true church at the given time and space, it still need hardware, because we are human beings living in a real reality. So that's kind of a church that we are going to discuss. And the definition of church is people of God in a gathering. So for American church, it's going to be American people. If we talk about the church history of China or Korea or Japan, then it's different kind of people. Japanese church, Korean church, Chinese church, Filipino church. See, it's people. It's not the building or institution, it's rather people. So essence is the people of God. And as we study the history, we need to focus on that people of God, how they struggle, how they perceive the issues, and how they make growth, how they overcome the objections and then persecutions and troubles they face. See, so that aspect is important, trying to understand the church as the people of God. Because the church is the people of God. The question is going to be, how godly are they? That's going to be the one major category of understanding or reviewing the history of a church or churches. Again, the question is, how godly were they, or are they? I mean, that's a relevant question for us today as well. How godly are we as a church? So that's the key, the major element and the most important category of doing a history of a church. But many today asking this very wrong question. How big is the church? I mean, that has no relevancy at all, no validity. It's not a valid question to ask. This might be a good question. How influential is the church? But what kind of influence are you talking about? It has to be godly influence, not political influence. I mean, you can have all the political influence as a church to the community, but if that political is not godly one, then there is no value to you being influential, politically influential. See, that's very key, important category. So people ask, how do you know if someone or a church is godly? Are they so religious? I mean, that's not the category. That's not the standard. So for me, being godly means being biblical. So the Bible is only authority and ultimate authority on our faith and life. See? Because of that, judging how godly you are has to do with it's about the history. So is the church, American church, were they godly? Were they biblical? That's going to be the question running through the whole study of this American church history. And the dominion is the dominance. It has to do with the dominance. It has to do with the influence. It has to do with the rule. And another word, the rather difficult word, sovereignty is another word for dominance. Is the overruling influence over certain domain. So you have a given domain. Domain is a given area, certain area, limited area. That's called domain. Within that domain, you need to have dominance, influence over the ruling and, the empowering So the church is there. Whether it's a local church or the church with a capital C, is there to exercise that godly dominance, to have dominion over. So that is going to be one key element when you are doing the church history. How dominant is the church in that society, that culture, and that nation, and that history? So dominance, the dominion over the history, dominion over the social issues, the political issues, economic issues. These are going to be the important category for us to review and understand. Okay, let us have a little break and we'll come back for further discussion. Okay, let's continue. Essence of the church. And the church is people of God. So again, how godly are they? Would be the key question. And then dominion. How dominant? How dominant is the church within that culture and society? Would be one important question as we do the history. Then community of saints. It's a community, it's a group of people, but not just a group of people, it's community. Community is connected. They share their life and the living. They share the culture. That's what the community is. That means that culture that community is having or making and sharing will be different from the culture outside. This will be basically the diagram in any context, because there's no 100% church in any given time and place in history. That has never been the case. Word means here, it means non-believers, non-Christians, non-saints who are not saints. The church is the gathering, the community of saints. So every church, when we say American church, there's a whole America, the world. It's called America. And within that America, the world, there's an American church. See, let's say Southern California, that's the world that we live in. Then there's a Southern Californian church, including every race and every age of saints, the believers, true believers. So that's going to be the diagram that we are talking about. And the church would create such community with a biblical culture, biblical lifestyle, and biblical worldview and thoughts. That's what the church is. And then because of the nature of church being within the world, then you have that word, the term dominance or dominion. Is your dominion of church is only limited within the people, believing people? If that's the case, the church is isolated and limited. The church is there in the world to go out into the world to make that impact that to bring the change, not only bring them to the church, into the life, from death into the life, but even though that does not happen to everyone, still, church is going to make the world a better world, meaning bring the world to more close to the biblical ideal. The world cannot become church sometimes. Not everyone in the world becomes Christian. I mean, that's ideal. I told you that it never happened. There's always going to be someone who does not believe or even go against the church. As that happens, the church is there to make an impact and influence and bring the change to make it better. Because we believe biblical is better than anything that is secular, earthly. See? So biblical is the best. It's the absolute good. And we want to bring that to the world, so world can become better than what it is now, or what it was yesterday. So today has to be better than yesterday from the biblical perspective. That's who we are. That's what the church is. So as we read and study the American church history, we are asking question, how the church impacted the world, so the church made the world a better, or bring it to closer to biblical ideal. That's going to be the very key question that we are going to ask as we do the history, or church history. So if the answer is yes, this much or that much, that's going to be a very key, important measurement. And the same standard, same category, or same question is being asked for us, the believers today. Because of the community of believers that we represent in a given community, which is the dominion, are we making that impact and influence, and are bringing change for the better for the whole community? Not just the church itself, but the dominion, the community around the church. That's going to be the key category, the question that we ask ourselves, because that's going to be the something that people are going to look for as they study our church history today. So the future generation is going to look for that, and we like to have that to be the good. I mean, we want to get good grade on that evaluation. Thus, to bring these kind of changes, the influence and dominance over the world, there are few things that every church does. And these are the mission, so-called the mission of the church. So that is going to be another category that we look into as we do the American church history. And did the church function as they should function? If they did, that's a good church. If they didn't, that's a weak church. So the salvation, did the church exists to save the people from death, the eternal death. I mean, everyone who does not know Jesus Christ, they are doomed to eternal death. some people believe the death is the end of your existence. Just disappearing or termination of your being. That's not the case. If you are aware of, you don't have to believe, if you're aware of your soul and the spirit, then you know the termination of your being. Maybe bodily, physical termination, yes, that's what the death is, physical death. But eternal death means your soul and spirit does exist after this life. This life. In English, there's a word saying afterlife. Even in our culture, in Asian culture, we say there's this life and the life beyond. So whether you're Western or Eastern, there's common belief there's something else after this life that we experience here on earth. So if that is the case, if that is true, the eternal death means your soul and spirit does exist forever, eternally, in the state of death. What is the state of death? It's agony, it's sorrow, it's pain, and it's a misery, it's the grief. That's all these negative things in life continues to exist with your existence. So you live with it forever. See, if that's true, that's going to be very terrible. And you have no way to escape from that eternal death. So the salvation has to do with that eternal death. There is a way to escape, to go out of that eternal death, and it's called salvation. And us Christians, whether Catholic or Protestant, we believe. And believing in the work and the name and the power of Jesus Christ, the very Son, only Son of God, who is God Himself, who died on the cross and bearing all the sin on that cross and paying the price with His own death, the blood. And that blood washes our sin because it is the blood that's shed for us or instead of us. So we become to have eternal life instead of eternal death. That's basic doctrine, that very basic theology or teaching of Christian faith. And then that Jesus of Nazareth has been resurrected to prove that He indeed is God Himself. He is the very Messiah. So that's the message, Christian message. And once you believe that message to be true, and then you have that eternal salvation. You have to receive that Jesus Christ into your heart. And then you experience that eternal peace of knowing that you will have eternal life instead of eternal death. So that's the salvation. That's the very reason that the church exists. So how do you evaluate and review the church in history? Did the American church or the churches, the local churches, do they did the salvation work diligently and effectively and biblically? Okay, it has to be biblical. Even the salvation. I mean, you say you're saving the eternal from someone from eternal death, but if you do that in a non-biblical way, then it's not valid. Then holiness. Holiness is another word, godliness. Holiness is godliness. It's Christ-likeness, another word. So you have the church need to be holy, without blemish, without sin, without iniquities, without the faults, without evil. So that's the qualification of holiness. So the very important key measurement as we review the American church in its history of 300-400 years, we want to look at, are they holy? Are we holy today as a church in America? See, that's going to be a key question. The wholeness is a little different than holiness. The wholeness, here the word wholeness means these things. Is it complete? All included. Not partial. And then healthy. Strong. Well-being. So we need to ask that question for the church today and church in the past, and the American church. Are they whole? Complete. How do we know if that is whole or not? According to the Bible, again. So, according to the Bible, church needs to be whole. That means church needs to address the issues, the political issues, and gender issues, racial issues, and the economical issues. All these issues that we find in the human existence or the reality that we live in, those are the consideration of church. Not so-called religious or spiritual. I mean, a very narrow definition of spiritual there, but the spiritual or religious. We don't want the Christianity to be a religion, just a ritual and the prayer and the Bible studies that happens within the church building, and then it doesn't go out beyond the church wall. Then it's a religion. It could be a good religion, but we don't want it to be a good religion, but we want it to be a Christianity. So the lifestyle, the culture, the community. Indeed, a much better community than any community in the worldly manner. See, that's what the church should be. And we are going to look at that element as well. Then steward of the world. See, again, church is there to be the steward, the responsible worker. The steward is a servant. It's a person who takes the charge. It's a manager in today's word. So we want to be a good manager of the world that is given. The people, the culture, the system, and even the ecology, the environment. So today's church need to, take a look at the taking care of environment at this time of the climate change. See, we also want to look at the history of American church. How sensitive were they taking care of this environment that's given by God? And the answer is not so much. So that's something that we learn from the past church history, and then we need to be concerned about the environment, the nature, animals, plants, and then this carbon dioxide, the energy, the water. These things are also consideration of a church. It has not been. Again, the gender issue, especially in America, so-called LB. Q. I mean, gay, lesbian, bi, transsexual, all these issues are becoming very real, even within the church community. We need to address. And then, recent years, we see the Black Lives Matter, and then Stop Hate Asian. See, what it tells us from last 4 years of Trump administration, he was able to bring these things out to the surface, which means it was always there under the water. It was only not visible. And many, at least half majority of American people, which many of them are conservative, so-called conservative Christians, they still have that ideology of white, black, Hispanic, Asian. That's how it's ranked in America, in race-wise. See, there's that idea of the rank by race. So white Christians are better Christians than black Christians. See? Biblically speaking, that's nonsense. That's a lie. Every Christians are the same. Indeed, for the matter of fact, every person is the same value, whether they are Christian or not. See, that's how the Bible teaches us. And that hasn't been the case. So this racial justice is very concern for the 21st century American church. Then a woman in a church, or woman in society in general, how we view the gender issue, man, woman, male and female in America. That's also a big subject in understanding American church history. So not only the black church, but there's an Asian church, and then Native American church, and so on. So these churches are also within the American church history, and we need to look at and address the issues regarding those. Church and a nation. That's why we deal with the American church history, not just church history. So America is a nation, and the church within that nation. We need to look at the dynamics, and then the interactions, and so on. See that paradigm. The vision of freedom to worship. In a nation of America, trying to provide and to sustain the freedom to worship. See, that has been attacked or disregarded or been threatened by those who are against the church or Christianity in general. So there is that force today going against Christian faith and trying to limit or the freedom of worship, freedom to worship. See, we want to see how that has developed in the course of American church. And by knowing that, we need to be able to address this immediate challenge from the world against the church. And colony and Anglican church. That's something that we are going to address as we try to see a church and a nation, or church and the state. Nation under God. You find that even some of the money that we use in America. So America started it as a nation under God. It's very, ironic that at the beginning of this nation, they strongly tried to separate the church and the state. But still, they weren't able to avoid that the nation under God within the Constitution. See, that's an irony. But it speaks about America, who they are, what it is, and how they started. So the religion and the state, or the Christian faith and the nation of America, the United States of America, has very close relationship. It's integrated. It's like two faces of a coin, both sides. You cannot have a coin without one face. See, it doesn't have that value. Then we come to 21st century America, where we live, where we are. See, this is where we stand now, and we are looking back, but at the same time as we do the American church history, we are trying to look forward. How this 21st century American church is going to be like, and what our responsibility is to bring that vision. So all the reason that we are doing the history, especially when we are doing American church history, is to see forward and then mandate ourselves accordingly, so we can bring that vision to reality. So always church has been doing that. As we stand at this present, look back and then project toward the future and take our responsibility and do the works that's necessary to bring that future in a biblical, godly way. So that's church and the nation. And as we try to understand the church, these are some miscellaneous things. The virtual fellowship and actual community, then cults and sects, and then pseudo-Christianity. See, Christian church has faced many of these things. The cults and sects and pseudo-Christianity, which are not a true, it's not true church. So these are some of the issues that we need to address. Because these, pseudo-Christianity or the cults has been there since Jesus Christ. And then today we have something called a virtual church. Especially last couple years, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a virtual church became something of normal. And we don't know how this thing is going to affect the future church, the way of doing church for us. But one thing we are finding out today, as we've been through about a year or more, a year and a half so far, right? Starting since last March. So it's been over a year. And we know the value of actual community, in-person fellowship, face-to-face worship, being together, the value of it. We know that it is very important. There are many elements that are missing as we do the virtual worship and fellowship. So that has never been in the history in the past. This is a new thing, 21st century church thing. But this virtual church and the versus actual community, the in-person worship, it's going to suggest a lot of things for the coming future. So we need to look into it and address those. Okay, we have a few more minutes, and let's just try to continue with the next subject. We'll just open and begin. Yeah, other names. There are some other names for the church, and we'd like to know the congregation. Yeah, that's some churches have a congregation instead of church. So, for example, Santa Ana congregation, and then some says Temple of Assembly of God. I'm not sure. A temple of such and such, and some denomination they use temple instead of church. And then assembly of, yeah, we know Assembly of God. That's the name of denomination, and then the idea of assembly, congregation, that's the same word actually, congregation and assembly. Gathering together as a people of God, the saints, the whole gathering. That's the name assembly. And then we have fellowship of such and such Christian or community. Oh, we also have the community of, or such and such a community in. So these names, the reason that I address and I introduce these names, because each names have it shows the significant of the church as a body of Jesus Christ. So all these names reflect certain characteristic of a church. So by understanding the meaning and the definition of congregation, temple, assembly, fellowship, and the community, we do know, or rather have a more deeper understanding of what the church is. And that those are the, you need to have this basic fundamental understanding of what the church is before we go into the history. So I think time's up, and thank you for your attention. And next week we'll continue with the topic of doing history. So goodbye for this week, and have a wonderful week until we come to see again next week. Take care.